The wind blew dry dust across the wide plain as the poor cowboy rode his tired horse along the narrow trail. His name was Luke, and he had worked hard all his life, fixing fences, digging wells, and trading what little he had for cornmeal and beans. He lived alone in a small wooden shack far from town, where the stars shone brighter than any lamp. That evening, when the sun burned red behind the hills, he heard a faint sound like a cry carried by the wind. At first he thought it was just the wind howling through the canyon, but then he heard it again, softer this time, almost human. He slowed his horse and turned toward the sound. Not far away by a dried riverbed, he saw something strange, a figure lying still near the rocks. When he came closer, he saw a young Apache woman, tall and strong, her skin covered in dust, her clothes torn, her long black hair tangled with leaves. She was breathing weakly, her face pale, and there was a wound on her arm that looked days old. Beside her lay a broken bow and an empty water gourd. She looked like she had been walking for miles without rest. Luke climbed down and knelt beside her. "Miss," he said softly, unsure if she understood English. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't move. He touched her wrist. It was cold. He looked around the empty land. There was no one else, no horse, no sign of a camp. She had been left here to die. He hesitated for a moment. Helping her could mean trouble. The town didn't look kindly on Indians, and if any Apache warriors found him near her, they might think he'd done something wrong. But Luke had never been the kind of man to leave someone suffering. He remembered his own mother's words when he was a boy. "Help when you can, son, even if the world doesn't thank you." So he lifted the woman gently into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, taller and stronger than most women he had met, but she felt light from hunger and exhaustion. He set her carefully across his horse's back and began the long ride home, walking beside the horse so she wouldn't fall. By the time he reached his shack, night had fallen and the moon was rising over the plain. He laid her on his bed, lit a lamp, and fetched water from the barrel outside. He cleaned her wound with a piece of cloth, then tore part of his own shirt to wrap it. She didn't wake, only whispered a few words in her native tongue. Luke couldn't understand them, but they sounded like a prayer. Through the night, he sat by her side, keeping the fire alive. At times, he thought she wouldn't make it. Her breathing slowed, her face turned pale again, but near dawn, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and she looked around the small cabin, confused. When she saw him, she tried to sit up, frightened, but her arm trembled. "Easy," Luke said quietly. "You're safe here. You were half dead out there." She looked at him with sharp, dark eyes, studying his face. Then in broken English, she said, "Why, you help me?" Luke shrugged. "Because no one else would." She stared for a moment, then closed her eyes again. Her lips moved as if she was saying thank you, but no words came. Over the next few days, she slowly recovered. Luke gave her what food he had, mostly beans, cornbread, and water, and changed her bandage each morning. She didn't speak much, but she watched him closely, like she was trying to understand who he was. He learned her name one evening when she pointed to herself and said softly, "Taya." He nodded. "Taya, that's a good name." She pointed at him next. "Luke," he said, smiling. Sometimes she would sit by the window staring out at the horizon as if expecting someone. Other times she helped him with chores even when she was still weak. She was tall and strong, her hands rough like someone used to hard work. When she carried water or chopped wood, Luke couldn't help but notice the quiet power in her movements. Yet there was sadness in her eyes, a deep pain she didn't speak about. One afternoon, while he was repairing the fence, she came outside and stood beside him. She held the broken bow he had found with her. "Bad men," she said slowly. "White traitors. They take, they hurt, they kill. I run, they chase." She touched her wound lightly. "I fall, I think. I die." Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. Luke felt anger rise inside him. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "Nobody's gonna hurt you now." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You good man," she said softly. That night they shared supper by the fire. Taya tried to learn more English words, repeating what he said with a small smile. For the first time in a long while, Luke felt less alone. There was something peaceful about her presence, the quiet strength, the way she listened to the sound of the wind as if it spoke to her. But early the next morning, everything changed. Luke woke to the sound of distant hoofbeats. At first he thought it was just travelers passing by, but then he heard shouting, voices calling in Apache. He went outside and saw them. Dozens of riders appearing over the ridge, their horses kicking up dust. At least 100 Apache warriors were riding straight toward his shack. His heart pounded. He turned to Taya, who had come to the doorway, her eyes wide. "Your people?" he asked quickly. She nodded slowly, her face pale. "They think—" "You take me. They kill white man." Luke swallowed hard. "Then we better talk fast," he said. But there was no time. Within minutes, the warriors surrounded his small cabin. They were armed with rifles, bows, and spears. Their chief, a tall man with feathers braided in his hair, rode forward. His face was stern, his eyes cold. He pointed at Luke and shouted something in Apache. Taya stepped in front of Luke, raising her hands. She spoke quickly in her language, her voice sharp and pleading. The chief's expression changed slightly, but he didn't lower his weapon. Taya spoke again, louder this time, pointing to the wound on her arm, then to Luke's bandaged hand. She was explaining how he had helped her. Some of the warriors exchanged glances, uncertain. Luke stood still, his hands open, trying not to make any sudden move. The chief dismounted and walked up to him slowly. He looked Luke up and down, then said in broken English, "You help her?" "Yes," Luke said quietly. "I found her half dead. She'd be gone if I hadn't." The chief studied him for a long moment, then turned to Taya and said something in Apache. She nodded, her voice trembling as she answered. Finally, the chief looked back at Luke and gave a slow nod. "You brave man," he said. "Many white men hate us. You not." Luke exhaled, relieved but still tense. The chief turned to his warriors and gave a short command. The crowd slowly pulled back, lowering their weapons. Taya's eyes filled with tears of relief. She looked at Luke and said softly, "They believe. You safe?" He nodded, his heart still racing. "Good. I was starting to think my last sunrise was this morning." Taya smiled faintly. "No. You live now. They owe you." As the warriors rode away, the chief gave Luke one last look and raised his hand in respect. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving the land silent again. Luke stood there beside Taya, the wind carrying the smell of dust and sage. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't alone in the world anymore. Under the quiet sky, after the warriors had gone, the cowboy stood for a long time outside his small cabin. The wind was cool, and the land stretched wide and calm again. Luke could still hear the echo of the horses fading over the hills. Taya stood beside him, her dark hair blowing in the wind, her face still pale from fear. She looked up at him with eyes full of something new. Trust, maybe, or gratitude that went beyond words. "They believe you," she said softly. "Chief says you have brave heart." Luke gave a tired smile. "I'm glad he thinks so. I thought I was done for." She shook her head. "You safe now? They tell others not to hurt you." He looked at her for a moment. "And you? What happens to you now? Will you go back with them?" Taya looked toward the horizon where her people had disappeared. Her voice was quiet. "My village far. I not belong there now. They think I weak. They think I bring trouble." She turned her eyes back to him. "You save me. I stay, if you want." He didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to company. He'd been alone for years, ever since his brother died in the war and his small herd was lost in a storm. The land had been his only companion. But now, standing there with this woman who had nearly died, something inside him softened. "You can stay," he said finally. "You earned that much." From that day on, life slowly changed. Taya learned to speak better English, and Luke picked up a few Apache words. She helped him with the animals, fixed the roof, and even taught him how to make simple medicines from desert plants. Sometimes they would sit outside at night and she would tell him stories from her people. The story of the mountain spirits, of the eagle that carried prayers, of the woman who brought rain after a long drought. Her voice was soft, but the way she spoke made the stories feel alive. One morning, Luke rode out to town for supplies. When he came back, he found two men near his cabin, local ranch hands from a nearby property. They were standing close to Taya, laughing in a way that made his stomach tighten. She stood still, her hands clenched, trying to stay calm. When Luke rode up, the men looked at him with sneers. "So this is where you've been hiding, Luke," one of them said. "Didn't know you were keeping company with the savages." Luke's face went cold. "You best ride on," he said quietly. The taller man laughed. "Don't get angry, cowboy, we were just being friendly. Maybe she'd like a real home." Before he could finish, Luke stepped down from his horse. He didn't raise his voice, but the way he looked at them made both men uneasy. "You leave her be," he said. "She's under my roof." The men stared for a moment longer, then spat on the ground. "You're a fool, Luke," one muttered. "The whole town'll hear about this." They rode off, dust rising behind them. Taya looked shaken. "They hate me," she whispered. "They don't matter," Luke said. "They don't know what happened. You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." After that, Taya stayed close to the cabin, but she still smiled sometimes when she worked, humming songs in her own tongue. Luke noticed how her presence filled the quiet space that used to feel empty. He started to fix up the place, mending the porch, building a small garden, even adding another bed in case she wanted her own space. Days turned into weeks, and they began to share everything: food, chores, laughter. Sometimes she teased him for how serious he looked when he worked. "Cowboy never smile," she'd say, tapping his arm lightly. He'd grin a little and answer, "Maybe I'm learning." Then one evening, dark clouds rolled in from the west. A heavy storm hit the plains, fierce winds rattling the windows. Their horse broke loose from the pen, and Luke ran out into the rain to get it back. Taya followed, shouting for him to come inside. The wind howled so loud they could hardly hear each other. Suddenly, lightning struck a tree nearby and it crashed to the ground, missing Luke by inches. When he stumbled back inside, soaked and shaking, Taya threw a blanket over his shoulders. "You crazy man," she scolded softly, her voice trembling. "You die for horse?" He looked at her with tired eyes. "It's the only one I got." She laughed through tears. "You care too much." "And you?" he asked. "You ran out there too." She looked away, embarrassed. "I not want you to die," she said quietly. The fire crackled in the hearth. They sat close, listening to the rain beat against the roof. Luke looked at her then, seeing not just the woman he had rescued, but someone who had changed his lonely life completely. "You saved me too, you know," he said. She frowned. "How?" "Before you came, I was just waiting for time to run out," he said simply. "Now, things feel different." She didn't speak, but her eyes softened. She reached out and touched his hand, gentle and sure. The days after the storm were bright and clear. Spring flowers bloomed across the dry land, and the world smelled clean again. One afternoon, riders appeared on the ridge. Apache warriors once more, but this time they came calmly, carrying gifts, baskets of dried meat, blankets, and corn. Taya's brother was among them. He was tall like her, with kind eyes. He spoke to Luke through Taya. "He says the chief told him about you," she explained. "They come to thank you, and to say, 'You friend of our people.'" Luke nodded with quiet respect. "Tell him he's welcome here." Her brother smiled and placed a necklace made of small white stones in Luke's hand. "For brave man," Taya translated, "to protect heart." After they left, Taya lingered by the doorway. "They say I can go home," she said softly. Luke felt a strange ache in his chest. "And do you want to?" She looked at him for a long time. "Home is where someone waits," she said. "I think I already home." Life went on peacefully after that. Luke taught her how to ride, better, how to mend fences, and she taught him how to track animals and find water when the land was dry. They worked side by side under the sun, shared quiet evenings by the fire, and sometimes without words, simply sat together watching the stars. The townspeople talked less as time passed. Some still looked away when they saw them in town, but others began to see the truth, that she wasn't dangerous, and that the cowboy who had once been poor and alone now carried himself with quiet pride. One summer evening, as the sky turned gold, Taya stood by the fence watching the horizon. Luke walked up beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "About how I almost died that day," she said, "and how I wake in your bed, not knowing if you good or bad. But now I know." "Know what?" he asked. "That good hearts still live in this world," she said softly. "And maybe one saved mine." He looked out over the land, wide and peaceful. "We saved each other," he said quietly. The wind moved through the grass, warm and steady. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, and the sound faded into the endless desert. They stood there together, two souls the world had nearly broken, now bound by kindness, by courage, and by the simple grace of finding each other when hope had almost gone. The poor cowboy had only meant to help a stranger, but in doing so he had found something greater than he ever thought life could give: peace, purpose, and a home that neither of them would ever be alone in again.